Hello and welcome to Gaming Hearts Collection, where we talk about games of the past and the present, specifically the 80s and 90s and the 2000s. Today we're going to focus on retro gaming, and the games that we're going to focus on are both Final Fantasy and Phantasy Star, the series of each game, and basically, we obviously know which one was better because we know which one lasted longer, but we're going to observe, I guess, some of the early origins of both games. Now, we're going to start with Phantasy Star 1 and Final Fantasy 1. Both games were great, but when Phantasy Star 1 was first released, it was groundbreaking, especially for a game that was released in the late 80s. It was a game that many people were excited about when it was first released, and people were blown away when they first played it. But ever since, Phantasy Star 1 and 2, the series, I guess, started to go downhill, which many people would probably argue. And ironically, around the same time, Phantasy Star 3 came out, Final Fantasy started to get better, specifically with Final Fantasy 3. And then by the time it got to 4 became a hit, and it actually won numerous awards from gaming publications. It even was named the best RPG video game by Electronic Gaming Monthly when it was released for the NES, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, back in 1991. With that being said, as time went by, there was a shift because while Phantasy Star 1 and 2 was great in terms of gameplay and graphics, for whatever reason, I guess Phantasy Star 3 began to decline, and when Phantasy Star 4 came out, it received a lot of criticism for the storyline, among many other things, and they decided not to go forward with the series, while Final Fantasy continued to go forward with their series, and the games got better over time, up until it got till 7, and then 7 was probably one of the best games, Final Fantasy games ever made, and it's receiving a remake as we speak, and it had a lot of characters that were iconic in the series that are still very popular to this day, and that might have been one of the reasons why Final Fantasy 7 or Final Fantasy series stood out more than Phantasy Star because of more iconic and memorable characters, while Phantasy Star, I guess not so much. And even though, similar to Final Fantasy, Phantasy Star kept changing the characters in each installment, for whatever reason, 7 actually had characters that people really liked, both fans and critics liked a lot, and ever since 7, I guess some of the games got better, like 8 and 9. They scored very high with critics, and fans seem to enjoy them, even though, many may argue it's not as popular as 7. But as time went by, both Final Fantasy and Phantasy Star had received several remakes. In terms of which one is more popular, I guess, it depends on who you are, if you're more of a Final Fantasy fan or a Phantasy Star fan. The Phantasy Star game has received several remakes, such as Phantasy Star Online 2. Some people who are diehard Sega fans who played it when they were younger still love the series to this day, and they'll still play it, while others play Final Fantasy since it's pretty much, probably one of the mainstream RPG games out there that many people seem to enjoy. And speaking of Final Fantasy, sometime this year they're supposed to be releasing Final Fantasy 15, and as we all know, they've been working on this for a few years. So will it be as good as some of the older games, Final Fantasy games such as 12, 7, 8, 9, we don't know, but it's more, there's more emphasis on realism, and as we heard, it's slightly darker than the other Final Fantasy games, so we'll have to wait and see how things turn out once it's released. But if you've seen video clips, you probably have an idea on what it's like already. But as far as Phantasy Star and Final Fantasy is concerned, while some people are diehard Phantasy Star fans because they were huge fans of the Mega Drive, and honestly, both games actually produced really great music and soundtracks, especially for Phantasy Star. The Mega Drive had some catchy, memorable music, while Final Fantasy, over time music got better, but the emphasis on gameplay was something that stood out more for people who actually bought the game and played it. So that being said, over time, things changed, and I guess after 4, Phantasy Star decided not to continue with the series, and Final Fantasy to this day is still making still coming out with titles, and there are plenty of remakes of some of the older games that you can enjoy, whether it be on one of the virtual console or networks, or PlayStation Network, or whatever it is, or maybe you downloaded the game on your phone, whatever. It's basically something that people can still enjoy to this day. A great RPG game, and I guess some of the things that are great about today's RPG, for Final Fantasy, I guess, is the fact that it's there have been added features that allows multiple people to enjoy the title itself. So, with that being said, has Final Fantasy series improved since the mid to late 90s or the early 90s? In some sense, it has, because 12 was actually pretty good, which actually came out in the early 2000s, while Phantasy Star was, wasn't completely extinct, but it had a remake back in 2005 for one of the games. But for the most part, Final Fantasy obviously ended up, for the most part, ended up taking over the RPG scene in terms of the fantasy genre. And even though both games were very exciting, people who are fans of either game can continue enjoying the game itself. Both games, depending on what you're a fan of. If you're a Sega fan, it's Phantasy Star. If you're a Nintendo fan, or just a fan of some of the Sony games, you're most likely Final Fantasy, even though there's a larger percentage of people who are fans of the Final Fantasy titles. So, with that being said, it was cool seeing the war between Phantasy Star and Final Fantasy during the 90s. It would have been great if if Phantasy Star lasted longer, but unfortunately after 4, they decided not to continue with the series. So, and some people to this day are asking, if there's ever going to be a Final Fantasy 5, sorry, not Final Fantasy, but Phantasy Star 5. Probably not, because Final Fantasy's so ahead. They're already on 15. They decided to end, Phantasy Star decided to end after 4, so I guess that'll tell you everything you need to know about the series. But it was still exciting. If you want to play some of the old retro games, you can definitely, go online and play them. As for Final Fantasy, you can enjoy all that, because most people play Final Fantasy anyways, and you could definitely enjoy the new game that's going to come out in Final Fantasy 15 if you still follow the series. So with that being said, this is Gaming Hearts Collection, and hopefully we can discuss more about gaming in the next podcast.